I'm here to tell you that being an empath or a highly sensitive person is not a curse like everyone says it is. Being highly sensitive means you are more attuned to the world by way of your five senses. A highly sensitive person is taking in 10 times more from their environment than someone who is not highly sensitive. Go into a restaurant as a highly sensitive person, and there are many factors at play. First, the placement of your seat. What is your view? Can you take in the whole place, or can you only see the wall in front of you? Are you by a window? Are the people seated next to you? How loudly are those people talking? Is there a large table of several people conversing, or is it fairly quiet? Is there music playing in the background? And how does that sound? Is it too loud? Is it your style of music? Maybe it's perfect. What about the temperature? Is there a fan blowing on you overhead? Are you next to a door that keeps catching the draft every time it opens? What about the seating itself? Are you in a booth? Are you in the middle of the restaurant with many people passing by you? Now, time to settle in and enjoy your company. Depending on how many distractions there are with sounds, lighting, temperature, the view, it can be very difficult to focus on the conversation. What about just going outside for a walk? Sounds simple enough, right? But for a highly sensitive person, walking on a hot sunny day without their hat or their sunglasses could spell for a disaster. Maybe it's too windy and the sound of the wind becomes a source of overstimulation. Or everybody just happens to be using their leaf blowers today or mowing their lawn. So here are the three downfalls of being a highly sensitive person. First is being overwhelmed by your surroundings. Multiple environmental factors due to a sensitive nervous system, which is related to nervous system regulation. And having a sensitive nervous system makes it harder for you to regulate it. And this is caused by a variety of factors, including chronic stress, trauma, poor sleep, anxiety. Even genetics can lead to a heightened sensitivity to stimuli and potentially cause pain and discomfort, even with mild triggers. Some people recovering from long COVID have been experiencing this. The way in which this manifests is being easily overwhelmed by loud noises, bright lights, crowds, or even the sense of touch, feeling pain more intensely than others in similar situations. And this includes emotional pain, which is why we manifest it in our physical bodies. There is this anxiety and feeling constantly on edge, or just unable to fully unwind. Not to mention mood swings due to the heightened sensitivity to these environmental factors. The second downfall is dealing with burnout. And for some people, it's a constant cycle of healing, burning out, healing, more trauma, burning out, healing, burnout. Gosh, it really does sound like being a highly sensitive person is a curse, way more than it being a superpower, because the third downfall is toxic relationships. Due to being highly sensitive, we're more prone to relationships with takers because we are overgivers. We sense the needs in other people, and as a result, we might become codependent and attract people who take our energy from us without replenishing it. Givers attract takers, as they say. Also, relationships just seem to be more difficult for HSPs. An argument can feel like a physical attack for us, and many will struggle with rejection sensitivity or an anxious attachment style, which results in attracting avoidant partners. Although HSPs can be very emotionally available to other people, it seems that they attract the complete opposite, the emotionally unavailable types. And there's also this tendency to avoid conflict because of our sensitive nervous system. Conflict is a no-go zone. So we also won't have the best boundaries in place as a result. Now, this brings us to learning how to fully experience the world and relationships without being overwhelmed. And the key ingredient here is having healthy boundaries. Boundaries are much more than learning how to say no. I mean, I've done a few videos on boundaries over the years that you can check out. But what I want to say here with respect to boundaries as a highly sensitive person has to do with first understanding what your needs are and then respecting your sensitive needs. So going into a restaurant that's loud and noisy and you're seated by a fan that's blowing cold air on you, you have permission to take care of your needs for a quieter environment and one that's more comfortable. Now, we can't always control our environment, but we can always choose the way in which we respond to it. Have I been known to change my seat in a restaurant more than once? Yes, I have. Have I decided that I needed to leave a restaurant and go somewhere else? Yes, I have. And the important aspect of this is that you are setting boundaries for yourself. You want to ensure that the people around you are respecting of your sensitive needs. But I know, it's not always possible. What if you've been invited to a big gathering of people? Some instances, you're not able to accommodate yourself in the ways that you normally would if you were just by yourself or with just one other person. So this is the time for you to set boundaries with yourself. You give yourself compassion. You remind yourself to ground yourself with your breath. You might even end up tuning out for a bit, and you give yourself permission to do that because that's what will happen when you're feeling overwhelmed. And what can easily happen from there is an anxiety attack, where you find yourself hiding out in the bathroom because you can't tolerate the social environment like you hoped you would. This might be a time when someone orders themselves a stiff drink, but often that's not the best choice for us. Sometimes it's about placing time limits on your social outings. No one's impacted if you happen to leave after socializing for 2 hours, while everyone else has the bandwidth to stay for another 2 or 3. You really come to know what you can tolerate, how you can accommodate yourself, and come prepared. Carry earplugs with you. Look up the places you're going to in advance so you have a sense of what to expect. Make sure you have a safe person with you. So if you have to leave, they're the one person who knows your situation. Don't be afraid to keep your jacket on if the place is drafty, or ask someone to switch seats. In relationships, we also need boundaries in place, so we're not putting ourselves last and being highly agreeable to things that we don't like. Having standards for yourself, having those emotional boundaries so you trust your gut feeling about people, and knowing the difference between your trauma response and your intuition. Having boundaries for yourself, especially when you're in those periods of loneliness or aloneness, so you don't settle for just anyone's company. You also need to be able to understand your own energy and how it works, so you can set boundaries with how much time you can commit to do things. Sometimes going to the grocery store might be all you can handle in a day. And if you've made lunch plans with someone and have a work project that also needs to get done, then boundaries are necessary to place the lunch date on hold until your social battery can handle another outing. Remember, what you were able to do today might not be the same tomorrow. So having compassion with yourself to know that you are consistently inconsistent with your energy. Setting boundaries for yourself is what leads to empowerment instead of being a victim. Instead of calling this whole thing a curse. One of the biggest energy vampires can actually be ourselves. When we wind up in victim mode or in highly critical and complaining mode, this does nothing to serve our energy in a positive way. As noted, we can empower ourselves by learning healthy boundaries. And what will happen once you do that is an increase in confidence. You feel more adapt to living your life in a meaningful way, which increases your self-esteem because you're taking care of your own needs instead of complaining about how the world wasn't built for you. And it's not. The world isn't specifically catered to any one person. So it's up to you to make accommodations for yourself. When you choose the path of empowerment, you start putting yourself first. And you are not only selective with what you do, with who you do it with, and how you do it, you are also selective with what you consume. From the food you eat, the shows you watch, the news you read. You are highly sensitive, remember? So you curate a life that is built for you, by you, and only you. You might recruit some very special team members that know you and respect your sensitivities, so they don't think you're weird for the accommodations you ask for. Instead, they likely have their own too. In the workplace, you're finding ways in which you can accommodate your sensitive needs so that you can do the best that you're meant to do in your chosen profession. It's important to have a boss that will also support your accommodations, but if not, it doesn't mean you can't keep standing up for yourself. Some of us will have our energy drained by being around that fluorescent lighting in the office all day. You can certainly request to have the bulbs removed in your section and plug in a lamp instead. If it's too cold, plug in a space heater. Bring your cozy office sweater. Too loud? Get those noise-canceling earplugs in. Too smelly? Request a scent-free working policy. Can't work that many hours in a day? That's fine. You find your own system for how to get through an 8-hour workday. Remember, highly sensitive people are also very creative and excellent problem solvers. See how you can use this to your advantage. It might seem like a lot to set up at first, but not only are you empowering yourself by doing this, you might even be empowering someone else who needs these things too, but was afraid to ask. See how your sensitivities are now becoming your superpower? Because it's helped you to discover and honor who you are, which is the empowered state that you start to truly embody. Now, this doesn't mean that everything is perfect and you never suffer again. In fact, you will, and new things will come up and challenge you. The thing is that once you start on this empowerment journey, you get better each time at figuring it out. This is where we talk about making the most out of your sensitivity. First comes acceptance. And I know you hear me talking about the importance of self-acceptance all the time, but just like anything else, you're born with that you cannot change. You must accept it so you can accept yourself. Once you've accepted it and you stop calling it a curse, then you start to learn from it. You grow a deep understanding about yourself so you can set those boundaries. Now you're going to use that empathy and heightened awareness in a way that gives your life purpose and meaning. You start to notice your strengths when it comes to being a highly sensitive person, instead of always criticizing yourself for it. They say that highly sensitive and empathic people evolve for survival. You have skills that only 30% of the population possess. We process information on a deeper level. And so we must understand how to utilize that to our benefit, because otherwise it can be very overwhelming, as already discussed. You are likely a very good listener, so utilize that honed sense in a positive, meaning way, such as in your field of work or with your children or your friends. However, be mindful of being such a good listener with people who are just there to steal your energy. This is where healthy boundaries come into play. You'll start to notice your own specific nuances when it comes to how well you actually process your environment in ways that no one else does. You get great at noticing patterns, you pick up the slightest changes or differences, which can come in handy too in the workplace or even just in your day-to-day life. We need to make sure that it's not being used in this hypervigilant type of way, because that will lead us to an anxious response. And that might not go over well or be well received. Again, it's about noticing the difference between responding from a place of trauma versus our intuitive knowing. And so instead of operating from that trauma response, which being highly sensitive can be said to also be a trauma response in itself, remember, as I had just mentioned, this way of being was evolved as a survival skill. But as we're coming to learn, it needs to be tamed. And so the response we can learn to move into with our sensitivity is the mindful response. When we are in the present moment on purpose, without judgment, we are curious, we are observers, we are noticing how we are responding to the outside stimuli. We are in tune and tapped into what our needs are in the here and now, so we can best serve ourselves and not feel so overwhelmed. This practicing of being in the present moment is so grounding for our nervous system, and it benefits our energy immensely. We can learn a slow and soft approach to life. We can remind ourselves that we are allowed to take things at our own pace. We are allowed to accommodate ourselves. We don't have to be rushing around, because quite honestly, rushing around and being so busy all the time increases our already heightened cortisol levels. That's the stress hormone. That adrenaline and cortisol spikes, and now we're in a state of fight or flight. This is one example of where the practice of mindfulness can be applied. Setting the intention to go into the world from a place of calm, slow, and soft energy. Knowing there is so much out there that's out of your control and so much that you're taking in. So reminding yourself of what you are in control of, and that is placing yourself in the energy that you want to embody. Breathing, affirming, and relaxing yourself while accommodating your needs. Now, one of the biggest ways you can make the most out of your sensitivity is by tapping into your creativity, whether it's writing, acting, photography, painting, singing, making music, dancing, pottery, woodworking. When someone who is highly sensitive engages in these artistic, creative acts, they take on a life of their own. The way you see the world and the way you hear and perceive the world is influencing your creative projects, and it's likely what you create is unlike anything anyone has ever seen. I could list a whole bunch of famous singers and actors and artists that are highly sensitive people. Vincent van Gogh, he once said, "I don't know if I'm extremely sensitive or life is unbearable." Perhaps he was seeing his sensitivity as a curse. Back in the 1960s, Jane Goodall, when she was just 26, she started exploring the world of chimpanzees. And in her words, a sense of calm came over me. More and more often, I found myself thinking, this is where I belong. This is what I came into the world to do. She made her sensitivity a gift. Anthony Bourdain, another highly sensitive person who had a great taste for food, and he shared his culinary experiences with us while he traveled around the world. Unfortunately, it appears that he may have succumbed to the curses of being a highly sensitive person. Because let's face it, addiction is one thing that will come up for many highly sensitive people for one reason or another, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But what I've noticed is a lot of highly sensitive people choose the self-employed entrepreneurial path. They have a big imagination and they bring to life their visions. They can even predict upcoming trends and are very inventive in what they create. It also allows you to be your own boss, so you can really accommodate your needs in whichever way you need to. Choosing a creative path is almost a non-negotiable. It is essential for any highly sensitive person. Whether you work in a restaurant or an office or on a farm, it's up to you to find your creativity so that you can thrive. HSPs need a creative outlet because without it, you feel suffocated. You feel limited in your potential. It's often the reason why many highly sensitive people feel so unfulfilled in life. Many people I've coached have been creative in one way or another, and when they come to me, one of their biggest complaints is that their creativity has been lost. What they used to love doing no longer brings them joy. And a telltale sign that your nervous system has crashed and you're in a state of burnout is when your creativity has stopped flowing. Stress and burnout is the #1 cause of loss of creativity. It feels awful to lose that part of yourself because it really is like losing who you are as a person. But let's face it, authenticity is your edge. Remember, you are a rarity. Only up to 30% of the population is experiencing what you're going through. So to be yourself isn't always easy. And I know many of us are going through life covering it up and masking our difficulties and trying to suppress and numb our sensitivities in one way or another. This is why addiction is so common with highly sensitive people. It's often the go-to coping mechanism. Many highly sensitive people will end up choosing a sober way of life. They realize it's the only way back to themselves. How to really be authentically you is to go about life in this real, raw dogged way of living. As you may have heard in my previous videos talking about the process of letting go of crutches and learning healthy coping skills instead. Sure, maybe the substances helped you unleash your creativity or give you the confidence to be out there in the world and show up. But as we age, we have to find another way. Until this finding your way back to your sensitive self in an empowering way is learning how to be in the world as yourself without the self-medicating habits that we used to rely on. This is really the hardest for neurodivergent people. And yes, if you're HSP, it's likely that you're also on the autistic spectrum or have ADHD. And it's very well known that neurodivergent people are also dealing with sensory processing disorders. For those of you that have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, the brain is also impacted in this way as a result of trauma throughout our lives. For me, coming to learn what mindful living was all about helped immensely to kick my bad habits to the curb. Although it took a few years, it happened in phases, and I worried about giving these things up because I thought they were responsible for my productivity, my creativity, my ability to be so outgoing. But that was just a lie I was telling myself because it was easier to believe all that until my nervous system didn't believe it. And then I was making my sensitivity even more unbearably sensitive. So take caution on your use of substances because as much as you may use it to cope with being so sensitive, in the long run, it will cause more harm than good. So now you have to show up in the world. You have to face it for all that it is. And that can be overwhelming. So you start to create a new reality for yourself. And that new reality is empowered with boundaries, seeing yourself in a positive light instead of having a dark cloud over you all the time, living as a victim, and your sensitivity is a curse. That new reality might also mean that you're more secluded, you're less social, you're less vocal, you're less active in the way you used to be. But you create this shift in your reality that brings you back to your creative edge, your authentic self. And it's like you meet yourself again for the first time. You meet those sensitive needs that now have boundaries in place, that you now accommodate yourself for, that you no longer judge yourself for. You have healthier coping skills and just an overall increased awareness of who you are. And you love that person. You know how to give yourself compassion and grace. You ease into a new, slow, and soft way of living. You understand your nervous system. You respect your nervous system because you understand that it's the whole operating system that determines whether or not you can turn your sensitivity into the superpower that it is, or the curse that you've falsely been made to believe it is.